did Rome go from a tiny city to a superpower? Let's uncover the secrets. Hey everyone! Have you ever wondered how a small, muddy village on the Tiber River transformed into the most powerful empire the world had ever seen? How did Rome, a place that started with nothing, end up ruling lands from Britain to Egypt? Well, today, we're unraveling that mystery. And trust me, you're in for an incredible ride. Because Rome's rise wasn't just about war and conquest. It was about strategy, resilience, and a little bit of myth and betrayal. So let's jump right in. The secret weapon behind Rome's success? Its location. All right, let's start with something most people don't think about. Rome's geography. It may not sound exciting at first, but hear me out. This is one of the biggest reasons Rome became unstoppable. Imagine this. You're an ancient general trying to invade Rome. What do you see? 7 massive hills surrounding the city, acting like natural fortresses. You and your army have to fight uphill while Roman defenders hurl down spears and rocks. Doesn't sound fun, does it? But Rome wasn't just well protected. It was perfectly placed for power. The Tiber River ran right through it, which meant Rome had access to trade routes, fresh water, and an easy way to move troops and supplies. Meanwhile, Rome's location in central Italy made it the ultimate crossroads between Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Trade, culture, and ideas flowed in, making Rome a melting pot of power. And let's talk about food, because no civilization can rise without it. Rome was surrounded by fertile plains, which meant endless grain, olives, and wine, not just enough to feed its people, but enough to trade and expand. Unlike Greece, which was divided by mountains and islands, Rome's terrain made it easy to unify and conquer surrounding regions. In short, Rome wasn't just lucky, it was destined to thrive. But hold on, Rome wasn't always the mighty empire we picture. In fact, before it became a republic, another civilization controlled it, and they're the ones who actually built the foundation of Rome. Who were they? Let's move on to that. The forgotten civilization that built Rome. Before Rome was Rome, there was another powerful civilization ruling northern Italy, the Etruscans. And let me tell you, without the Etruscans, Rome might never have existed. So who were these people? The Etruscans were a mysterious, advanced society that thrived before the Romans took over, and the Romans learned a lot from them. For example, have you ever seen the Great Roman Arches? Those weren't originally Roman, they were Etruscan inventions. The famous Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's first drainage systems, also built by the Etruscans, helping transform Rome from a swamp into a real city. Even gladiator fights, the heart of Roman entertainment, came from the Etruscans. They used to hold combat events at funerals, and the Romans took this idea and cranked it up to an extreme level. But the Etruscans didn't just shape Rome's buildings and games. They influenced Roman religion, military tactics, and government. The Romans even adopted Etruscan fashion, including the toga, which later became a symbol of Roman citizenship. So, what happened to the Etruscans? Well, the Romans happened. They overthrew their Etruscan kings and took power for themselves. But instead of erasing them, they absorbed their culture. The fusion of Etruscan, Greek, and local Italian traditions created a new kind of civilization, one that was ready to dominate the world. And speaking of origins, let's dive into Rome's most famous myth, a story of destiny, betrayal, and the city's violent beginning. The myth of Rome, Romulus, Remus, and a murderous beginning. Every great civilization has a legendary beginning, and Rome's story is one of the most dramatic ever told. Picture this. Twin brothers Romulus and Remus are born into royalty but abandoned as infants. Left to die by a ruthless king, they're miraculously saved by a she-wolf who raises them in the wild. As they grow, their destiny calls. They must build a city. But here's where things take a dark turn. The brothers disagree on where the city should be located, and in a fit of rage, Romulus kills his own brother. Just like that, Remus is dead, and Rome is born in blood. This wasn't just a bedtime story for the Romans, it was their identity. They saw themselves as warriors, born from conflict and destined to rule. The myth also gave them a divine connection, as Romulus was believed to be a descendant of Mars, the god of war. But was any of this true? Well, not exactly. Archaeologists believe that Rome actually started as a small cluster of villages around 753 BCE. Over time, these settlements merged and grew stronger, thanks to trade and strategic alliances. So, while Romulus and Remus make for an epic story, the real Rome was built through hard work, migration, and smart politics. And speaking of politics, let's move to the next phase of Rome's rise, the moment it transformed from a kingdom into a republic. Rome's republic, when the people took power. Well, sort of. All right, so Rome had kings for a while. But eventually, the people had enough. The last king, Tarquinius Superbus, was so corrupt and cruel that the Romans overthrew him and declared, "No more kings." Instead, they created something new, a republic. Sounds like a perfect democracy, right? Well, not quite. At first, power was held by the patricians, wealthy aristocrats who controlled politics, religion, and land. Meanwhile, the plebeians, or common citizens, had almost no rights. Naturally, this led to conflict. And thus began the struggle of the orders, a centuries-long battle between the rich and poor. The plebeians weren't going to stay silent, and through protests, strikes, and political maneuvering, they forced the patricians to share power. One of their biggest victories? The creation of the tribune of the plebs, an official position that allowed them to veto unjust laws. They also got Rome's first written laws, the 12 Tables, which prevented the rich from making up rules on the spot. These changes didn't just help the plebeians, they strengthened Rome as a whole. A more balanced government meant stability, and stability meant Rome could focus on expansion. And oh boy, did they expand. Final thoughts. Rome's rise was just the beginning. Rome's journey from a small settlement to a republic was only the first chapter. The next steps? Conquering Italy, defeating Carthage, and becoming the ultimate superpower. But before we get to that, I want to hear from you. What do you think was the biggest reason for Rome's success? Its location, its military, or something else? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more deep dives into history, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because we have so much more to explore about the Roman Empire. Until next time, keep questioning history. It's even crazier than fiction. The golden age of Rome, power, betrayal, and the height of an empire, Rome. The greatest empire the world had ever seen. A force so dominant, so unstoppable, that even today its influence is everywhere, in law, in language, in the very roads beneath our feet. But Rome was not just an empire, it was an arena, a battleground of ambition, where power was won with blood and lost with betrayal. An age of emperors and conquerors, of genius and madness, of civilization and sheer brutality. So step into the streets of ancient Rome, feel the weight of history pressing down, because this is not just a story, this is a war for power, and only the most ruthless will survive. Julius Caesar, the rise of a dictator. It all begins on the battlefield. 58 BCE. Rome is already a force to be reckoned with, but one man is about to push it beyond anything the world has ever seen. Gaius Julius Caesar, a general, a tactician, and a man whose ambition knows no limits. His target? Gaul, a vast and untamed land, filled with fierce warriors who refuse to bow to Rome. For nearly a decade, Caesar wages a brutal campaign, crushing tribes, outmaneuvering enemies, and rewriting the rules of war. He doesn't just command from the safety of a tent. He's on the front lines, fighting alongside his men, earning their undying loyalty. And that loyalty? That makes him dangerous. Back in Rome, the Senate watches in fear, because Caesar isn't just winning battles, he's winning hearts. He's becoming more powerful than the government itself. And a man with that kind of influence, he's a threat. And he knows it. The crossing of the Rubicon, a point of no return. 49 BCE. Caesar makes his move. Standing at the banks of the Rubicon River, he has a choice: submit to the Senate's demands and relinquish his power, or march on Rome and take it for himself. He steps forward. With that single act, he commits treason. Rome is thrown into civil war. But Caesar moves fast, like a storm, sweeping through Italy, forcing his enemies into exile. He chases Pompey, the Senate's champion, across continents. From Greece to Egypt, battle after battle, until there is no one left to stand against him. And then, he returns to Rome, not as a general, but as its master. Caesar is declared dictator for life. The Republic? It's nothing more than a shadow. Rome belongs to him now. Some call him a savior, others a tyrant, but in the heart of the Senate, whispers of rebellion are growing. The Ides of March, the murder that shook Rome, March 15th, 44 BCE. Caesar walks into the Senate unaware that today, he will never walk out. He is surrounded, faces of friends, allies, men he has trusted for years, but trust in Rome, it is worth less than a handful of coins. The first dagger strikes, then another, and another. Blood spills onto the marble floor. His killers don't stop. 23 times the blades sink into his flesh, and as he falls, his eyes lock onto one face, the one man he never expected to betray him. Brutus. Et tu, Brute? With those final words, Caesar, Rome's greatest leader, collapses. The Senate celebrates. They believe they have saved the Republic. But what they've really done is unleashed chaos. Augustus, the boy who became an emperor. Rome is leaderless, a battlefield of power-hungry generals and scheming politicians. But in the shadows, one man watches. He is young, too young. No one takes him seriously. His name? Octavian, Caesar's adopted son. And he is about to change everything. Octavian doesn't just fight for power, he plays the game like a master. He forms alliances, then breaks them when they're no longer useful. He pits generals against each other. And when the time is right, he strikes. The final battle comes at Actium, 31 BCE, the war for Rome's future. Octavian crushes Mark Antony and Cleopatra, eliminating his last rivals. Rome is his. But he doesn't take power by force. No, he is far too clever for that. He pretends to restore the Republic. He steps back. The Senate, desperate for stability, begs him to rule. And so he takes the title of Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The Republic is dead. The Empire is born. Pax Romana, Rome's golden age. For the next 200 years, Rome flourishes like never before. The empire stretches from Britain to Egypt. Trade, wealth, and culture explode. Roads connect cities. Laws unify nations. Rome is not just a place, it is an idea, a force greater than any king, any army. But Rome is always expanding, always consuming, and its secret weapon? Citizenship. Unlike other conquerors, Rome does not just rule its enemies, it absorbs them. Fight for Rome, swear loyalty to Rome, and you can become Roman. This is how the empire thrives. But even the greatest empires, engineering marvels, roads, aqueducts, and blood in the arena. Rome is not just powerful, it is advanced. Its roads stretch over 250,000 miles, built so precisely that some still survive today. Its aqueducts bring fresh water from hundreds of miles away, feeding the empire's thirst for luxury. And then, there is the Colosseum, a masterpiece of architecture, but also a monument to brutality. Gladiators fight. Criminals are torn apart by wild beasts, and the people cheer, drunk on bloodlust. But this is not just entertainment, it is control. Keep the masses entertained and they won't question the emperor's rule. The Roman military, the machine that built an empire. Rome does not conquer through diplomacy, it conquers with the legions. Soldiers are not just warriors, they are engineers, strategists, masters of war. They march 20th miles a day, build entire forts overnight, and crush enemies by morning. Their greatest weapon? Adaptability. Rome learns from its enemies, steals their tactics, improves them, and then uses them to destroy them. This army built an empire, but when discipline falters, when corruption seeps in, this army will also be the one to watch it. The fall of Rome. A story for another time. Rome's golden age was built on power, war, and innovation. It changed the world forever. But even the mightiest empires are not invincible. Power is never truly secure. And Rome will fall. Not to a single sword, but to corruption, greed, betrayal. But that is a story for another time. If you thought Rome's rise was dramatic, wait until you hear about its fall. Stay tuned. The cracks begin to show. The slow collapse of Rome. Rome, the mighty empire built on power, strategy, and discipline. It seemed unstoppable, an unbreakable force that ruled over vast lands for centuries. But no empire lasts forever. Beneath the surface of Rome's golden age, cracks had already begun to form. Cracks that would eventually shatter Rome itself. And these weren't just minor issues. They were deep-rooted problems that slowly ate away at the empire. Corruption, economic struggles, religious transformation, and constant barbarian invasions all played their part in Rome's downfall. So, how did one of the greatest empires in history fall? Let's break it down. Political corruption and the fall of the Republic. Before Rome fell as an empire, it first fell as a republic. For centuries, Rome was built on a system of checks and balances. The Senate and elected officials shared power, and the Republic functioned, at least on paper, as a government for the people. But as Rome grew, so did the ambitions of its leaders. They no longer served the Republic, they served themselves. The rise of powerful generals. How Marius and Sulla undermined the Senate. The first major crack in Rome's foundation, power-hungry generals. See, in the early days, Rome's armies were controlled by the Senate. But as Rome expanded, that control shifted into the hands of individual generals, leaders like Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Instead of soldiers fighting for the Republic, they became personally loyal to their generals. Why? Because these generals promised them land, wealth, and glory. And this changed everything. Power was no longer in the hands of politicians. It belonged to whoever had the strongest army. Sulla proved this in 88 BCE when he did something no Roman general had ever done before. He marched his army into Rome itself, seized power, and wiped out his enemies. From that moment on, Rome's democracy was dead. Bribery and power struggles. How corruption led to chaos. With generals now controlling politics, the Senate turned into a battlefield of bribes, assassinations, and power struggles. Wealthy elites bought votes, rigged elections, and ensured only the rich had power. Street gangs formed to intimidate political rivals. Violence replaced debate. Rome's own politicians were literally killing each other for power. By the time Julius Caesar came to power, the Republic was just a puppet government. The real power lay in the hands of whoever controlled the military. Rome had become an empire in all but name, and corruption had laid the groundwork for its future collapse. Economic struggles, inflation, taxes, and decline. At its peak, Rome's economy was one of its greatest strengths. Trade was booming, wealth poured in, and life was good. But cracks started to show. And just like its politics, Rome's economy was built on a fragile foundation: the cost of expansion. How Rome's endless wars drained its treasury. War made Rome powerful. But war was also expensive. The Roman military was constantly fighting, from Britain to the Middle East, from Spain to North Africa. Keeping those armies fed, equipped, and paid was draining Rome's treasury. The solution? Higher taxes. Farmers and merchants were hit the hardest, and it didn't stop there. As Rome expanded, gold and silver became scarce. This led to inflation where money became less valuable. Prices skyrocketed, and suddenly everyday citizens were struggling just to survive. Over-reliance on slave labor. How the economy collapsed. Here's another major problem. Rome's economy was built on slavery. For centuries, Rome's conquests flooded the empire with millions of slaves. They worked the farms, the households, and even some industries. But what happens when Rome stops expanding? Less expansion, fewer slaves. Fewer slaves, less production. Less production, a collapsed economy. Without cheap labor, farms failed, trade slowed, and unemployment skyrocketed. And as the rich got richer and the poor got poorer, social tensions exploded. Rome was rotting. The rise of Christianity. A new power in Rome. For centuries, Rome's identity was built on pagan gods, traditions, and rituals. But then came Christianity, a movement that challenged everything Rome stood for. Persecution of Christians. Why emperors saw Christianity as a threat. At first, Christianity was seen as dangerous. Unlike Roman religion, Christians refused to worship the emperor as a god. They believed in one true God, rejecting Rome's many deities. This was seen as treason. Emperors like Nero and Diocletian brutally persecuted Christians, executing them in arenas, burning their scriptures, and trying to wipe out the faith. But here's the twist. Persecution only made Christianity stronger. The more Rome tried to crush it, the more people converted. Constantine the Great and the Edict of Milan, how Christianity became Rome's official religion. Then, in 313 CE, everything changed. Emperor Constantine the Great issued the Edict of Milan, officially legalizing Christianity. And that wasn't all. Constantine himself converted to Christianity, becoming the first Christian emperor. By 380 CE, under Emperor Theodosius I, Christianity became the official religion of Rome. For some, this was Rome's spiritual salvation. For others, it was the final nail in the coffin of the old empire. The barbarian threat, Rome's borders under siege. Rome had always been a fortress, defended by its legendary legions. But by the 4th and 5th centuries, those defenses were failing. The Huns and Attila, a fearsome enemy. A new terror was rising in the east, the Huns. Led by Attila the Hun, they were fast, brutal, and unstoppable. They burned cities, terrorized Rome's allies, and pushed Germanic tribes into Roman lands. The Western Roman Empire? It was too weak to stop them. The Roman army's decline. Why Rome could no longer defend itself. Once, the Roman legions were the greatest military force in the world. By the time of the empire's fall, they were a joke. Corruption spread through the military. Commanders took bribes instead of defending Rome. Rome relied more on mercenaries, foreign soldiers who had no true loyalty to the empire. When invaders struck, Rome's armies were too weak, too slow, and too disorganized to stop them. And in 410 CE it happened. The Visigoths sacked Rome, the first time in 800 years that the Eternal City had fallen. By 476 CE, the Western Roman Empire was gone. The last emperor, Romulus Augustus, was overthrown by a barbarian king. Rome, the heart of the greatest empire in history, had fallen. Rome's fall, a lesson in power, corruption, and collapse. Rome didn't fall overnight. It decayed from within before it was taken from the outside. Political corruption weakened its leadership. Economic struggles drained its resources. Religious transformation reshaped its identity. Barbarian invasions delivered the final blow. Rome's story is a warning. Even the greatest empires can fall, not with a single strike, but with 1,000 small cracks. And in the end, it wasn't the sword that killed Rome. Rome destroyed itself. Let's move to the next topic, the unstoppable rise of Rome. The rise of Rome was no accident. It was the result of strategic location, military strength, cultural adaptability, and sheer determination. What started as a small cluster of villages along the Tiber River would eventually evolve into a city that commanded the known world. But before Rome became an empire, it had to grow, fight, and establish its identity. Rome's geography played a fundamental role in shaping its destiny. The Italian peninsula was rich in fertile land, making agriculture a reliable source of food and trade. The mild Mediterranean climate allowed for year-round farming, ensuring a stable economy from the very beginning. The Tiber River was a lifeline, providing fresh water, transportation, and an essential trade route that connected Rome to the rest of the Italian peninsula. But perhaps the most important geographical advantage was the 7 Hills of Rome, a natural fortress that protected the city from invaders. Unlike cities that were built on open plains and vulnerable to attack, Rome's hills made it easy to defend. This allowed the city to grow steadily without constant threats of destruction. Additionally, Rome's central location in Italy made it the perfect crossroads for trade and expansion. It had easy access to both the Mediterranean and the interior regions of the peninsula, setting the stage for its future dominance over land and sea. However, Rome's rise was not purely geographical. It was also cultural. The Romans were not the first great civilization in Italy. Before them, the Etruscans ruled over central Italy, bringing with them a wealth of knowledge in engineering, military tactics, and governance. The Etruscans were master builders, constructing the first paved roads, drainage systems, and large-scale temples. They introduced the use of stone arches, which would later become a defining feature of Roman architecture. Even Rome's early religious practices, gladiatorial games, and political institutions were heavily influenced by the Etruscans. Despite their contributions, the Etruscans were eventually overthrown by the Romans, who were eager to carve out their own destiny. But instead of discarding Etruscan innovations, the Romans absorbed them, refining and expanding upon them. This ability to adopt and improve upon the ideas of other cultures would become one of Rome's greatest strengths, allowing it to flourish while other civilizations faded into history. A city born from myth and reality. Every powerful empire needs a powerful origin story, and Rome had one of the most legendary tales of all time. According to Roman mythology, the city was founded by twin brothers Romulus and Remus, the sons of the war god Mars and the priestess Rhea Silvia. Their tragic story begins when they were abandoned as infants, cast into the Tiber River in a desperate attempt to eliminate them. But fate had other plans. The twins were rescued by a she-wolf, who nursed and protected them until they were discovered by a shepherd named Faustulus. Raised among shepherds, the boys grew into strong, ambitious warriors. Eventually, they learned of their royal heritage and returned to overthrow the wicked king who had ordered their deaths. Now victorious, the brothers sought to establish a new city along the Tiber. But a bitter dispute arose over who would rule. Romulus and Remus each chose a hill on which to build the city. Romulus selected Palatine Hill, while Remus favored Aventine Hill. To settle the conflict, they turned to the gods for a sign. According to legend, Remus saw 6 vultures, but Romulus saw 12. Claiming divine favor, Romulus declared himself the rightful ruler. Remus mocked his brother, even jumping over the newly built walls of Romulus's city in defiance. In a fit of rage, Romulus killed Remus, declaring, "So perish anyone who crosses my walls." With his brother gone, Romulus named the city Rome after himself and became its first king in 753 BCE. But how much of this story is true? While it is a captivating tale, archaeological evidence suggests a more practical reality. Historians believe that Rome's origins were not the result of divine intervention or mythical heroes, but rather the gradual merging of Latin, Sabine, and Etruscan tribes who settled in the region. These early settlers built small villages on the Palatine and Capitoline hills, which eventually unified into a single city-state. Despite this, the legend of Romulus endured because it captured the essence of Rome itself: strength, ambition, and an unyielding will to conquer. From the very beginning, Rome's identity was tied to war, power, and the belief in its own destiny. Whether or not Romulus truly founded the city, his legend served as a powerful symbol of Rome's unrelenting spirit, a spirit that would drive the empire to unimaginable heights. The unstoppable rise of Rome. All right, let's talk about how Rome went from a tiny settlement along the Tiber River to one of the most powerful empires in history. This wasn't just luck. Rome's rise was fueled by its strategic location, military dominance, cultural adaptability, and sheer determination. At first, Rome was nothing more than a cluster of small villages. But over time, it grew into a city that would control the known world. But before it could become the empire we all recognize, it had to fight, expand, and establish its identity. How geography gave Rome the edge. Rome's location played a huge role in shaping its destiny. Think about it. If a city has easy access to food, water, trade routes, and natural defenses, it's already ahead of the game, and Rome had all of these advantages. Fertile land and a stable food supply. The Italian peninsula had rich volcanic soil, which meant that farming was not only possible, but thrived. Romans could grow wheat, barley, olives, and grapes, ensuring that they had enough food to support a growing population. And thanks to the mild Mediterranean climate, they could farm year-round, giving them a strong economic foundation from the very beginning. The Tiber River, Rome's lifeline. A city without water is a city that won't last long. But Rome had the Tiber River, which provided fresh water, irrigation, and an essential trade route. The river connected Rome to other parts of Italy, making it easy to trade goods, transport armies, and stay connected with neighboring regions. And since the river was inland, Rome wasn't exposed to constant attacks from enemy fleets the way coastal cities were. The Seven Hills, natural fortresses. Unlike cities built on open plains that were vulnerable to attack, Rome had a huge advantage: its seven hills. These hills gave the city natural defenses, making it harder for enemies to invade. If an attacking army wanted to conquer Rome, they had to fight uphill, giving Roman defenders a major tactical advantage. This allowed the city to grow steadily without constantly worrying about being wiped out by invaders. The perfect location for expansion. Rome wasn't just well defended, it was also perfectly positioned for growth. Sitting in the center of Italy, Rome had easy access to both the Mediterranean Sea and the rest of the peninsula. This made it the perfect launching point for trade and military expansion. Once Rome took control of Italy, it was in the ideal spot to dominate Mediterranean commerce and Rome's secret weapon, cultural adaptability. But here's the thing. Rome's rise wasn't just about geography. It was also about learning from others and making their ideas even better. The Romans weren't the first great civilization in Italy. Long before Rome became powerful, the Etruscans ruled central Italy, and they brought engineering, military tactics, and political organization to the region. The Etruscans, Rome's first teachers. The Etruscans were master builders, and they passed down some key innovations that Rome would later perfect, including paved roads and drainage systems, early versions of the massive infrastructure Rome would become famous for. Stone arches, which later became a defining feature of Roman architecture. Religious practices, gladiatorial games, and political institutions that influenced Roman traditions. The Roman takeover. Eventually, the Romans overthrew the Etruscans around 509 BCE and decided to create something entirely new, the Roman Republic. But instead of just wiping out Etruscan innovations, the Romans absorbed, refined, and improved them. This ability to borrow from other cultures and make things even better became one of Rome's greatest strengths. Rome's mythical beginnings, the story of Romulus and Remus. Now, every great empire needs a great origin story, and Rome had one of the most legendary tales of all time. According to Roman mythology, the city was founded by twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, who were said to be the sons of Mars, the god of war, and a priestess named Rhea Silvia. But their story wasn't exactly a peaceful one. The tragic beginning. As infants, Romulus and Remus were abandoned and cast into the Tiber River because of a prophecy that they would overthrow the ruling king. But fate had other plans. A she-wolf miraculously found them, nursed them, and kept them alive until a shepherd named Faustulus took them in. Raised among shepherds, the twins grew into strong, ambitious warriors. The founding of Rome. As they got older, Romulus and Remus discovered their royal heritage and returned to overthrow the evil king who had ordered their deaths. With their enemy defeated, they decided to build a new city along the Tiber River. But here's where things took a dark turn. The brothers couldn't agree on who should rule the city. Romulus wanted to build it on Palatine Hill, while Remus preferred Aventine Hill, so they turned to the gods for a sign. According to legend, Remus saw 6 vultures, but Romulus saw 12. Romulus claimed this was proof that he was favored by the gods and declared himself king. When Remus mocked him and jumped over his newly built city walls in defiance, Romulus flew into a rage and killed his own brother, saying, "So perish anyone who crosses my walls." With Remus dead, Romulus named the city Rome, after himself, and became its first king in 753 BCE. Myth versus reality. What really happened? Now let's be real. How much of this story is actually true? Historians believe that Rome's origins weren't the work of divine twins raised by a wolf, but rather the gradual merging of Latin, Sabine, and Etruscan tribes who settled along the Tiber River. Over time, these groups combined their resources, built villages, and eventually formed a single city-state. But despite its mythical nature, the legend of Romulus endured because it perfectly captured the spirit of Rome: strength, ambition, and an unyielding will to conquer. Whether or not Romulus truly founded the city, his story became a powerful symbol of Rome's relentless drive for greatness. From the very beginning, Rome saw itself as a city of warriors and rulers, destined to expand, dominate, and create a lasting legacy. And as we'll see, that's exactly what it did.